Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for another session on ASP.NET Core Part 4. Now in this part we're going to specifically talk about how to set up your the database, the backend, and how to have source control enabled on that and having to set up a deployment process. So it's not going to be so much about ASP.NET Core, but more about how to set up all the different ends and pieces to get you to the point to where you actually start developing the ASP.NET Core. Now that's an integral part of it, and that's why we're going over that. I have listed some other stuff in here where at some point we're going to go talk about having that blog website and the administrating the blogs by creating and deleting and modifying and whatever, and then also for monitoring and if there's any errors, what people are searching for, the logging pieces of it, where would the logs go, why would you need logging, and then we're actually going to also create a blog API, and that's going to be using the web API. So all of these is going to happen later on, but for now let's actually talk about the database and how we set that up. So here we are at our SQL Server, and I'm going to go over the blog database that we've set up. If we open up the database diagram, this is the diagram I've created for our blog, and we'll go over all these tables and how they relate to each other. Just a quick thing, when you're creating a diagram in SQL Server, and if we go to the system tables, the sys diagrams is where it's going to hold the data. So if we select all, you can see the blog diagram name. And then we have this definition, which is a binary data that's inserted into this column, and that's basically what our diagram looks like. So in here we have a bunch of tables. Let me zoom out so you can see a little bit better. And these tables are related to each other, and let's go over what those are. So this is our blog template that we've been working, and basically we also have our test item from the previous ASP.NET parts that we were posting. We're going to remove that at some point, but let's go ahead and go over how this relates to the data structure. So if you look at this, we have the subscribe, and then we have the search and the sign up. We're not going to do anything for this right now. We're going to leave that off. At some point we're going to come back and take care of that, because we do want to create a fully functional blog site. Then we have what is called categories, and these are basically links that describe or associate and group the different blogs. You can have actually multiple categories to a blog. For example, this could be world and technology, or it could be US and culture. So that's basically why we have our post, and our post has categories, and this is a many-to-many relationships. The next thing is we have a title for our blog, and then we have a little summary, and then the link that's going to take us to the details of that blog. Now this is pretty prominent, and maybe because this is a most recent post, or this is maybe the most viewed post. You get to decide how you want to display this. Then we have these other little thumbnail section underneath this. It's not as prominent, but it has the same information. So we have basically the featured, maybe a date and a little summary, and then the link. Now this also has the date it was published, and also has the category that is associated with. So basically we have those two, and then we actually go into the actual blog, which is the basically we have the title, we have the date, and we also have something here where there's a link to the person who created the blog, and then we have the actual blog down at the bottom. And if we look at our database table, and we have our post, we have an ID. This ID, and if you look at this properties, you can get that by right-clicking and go into the properties. It will give you this if you don't have it. And if you look at this, this is a identity field that's created by that we created, where SQL will actually increment this and seed it by 1, meaning that if we were to post and create a record for this post, this would get incremented as 1, and we create another one, it'll be 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it'll continue with that. And so we're going to be using this identity to be able, when a user clicks, it will take us to that blog using that identity column. Next we have our summary column. This is going to be, well, we have, excuse me. So next we have our title, where we looked at the template that would have a description of what this blog post is about. And then we have a small summary, and then we actually have the content. Then we have our publish date. This publish date is the data that you see in here. And then we also have is active, or a column for being active. So the way this would work is that you can actually post a blog, but you may not want to release it because you're continuing working on it, and at some later time you're going to come back and finish it and then publish it. So when you set the active flag to true, then you want to have a publishing date of when that was published, so that you could be able to display it and be able to search it. Then these create and update the two columns or internally, and this is actually helpful for administration purposes, where you can do queries to see how old a record is or when the last time was updated. So you could do maybe archiving or deletion of records to make your database more efficient. So basically that is the blog post that we have. And then we have the category association. So basically, if you have one table and you create a one-to-many relationship, so for example, we have comments, and we'll go over that in a little bit. It has just one-to-many. But if you have a many-to-many relationship, and how you show this in a database is that you create an intermediate table between the post and the category, and it's going to have the identity or the ID, which will be a foreign key for the category ID, and then the ID of the post, which will be the foreign key here. And so now we can have a category associated to a post multiple times. So if this was, let's say, the blog post over here, and this is blog post 1, then what would have here is the first record will say 1, and a category, let's say that would be world. Then this would be, and this would, let's say the record is 1 as well. So then you had one record of saying 1, 1. Then a second record, maybe, let's say we'll have technology, and that will be record number 3. So then the record you would insert is 1 and 3. And that's how you can associate it, all those different categories to it. Now for the comments, if we go here to our blog, you notice that we do not have any comments associated to this, but maybe you would want to have that because you want to be able to interact with the people who are reading your blog. And so that's why we have this comment section here. It's very similar to the post. It has an ID, it has a post ID, which the comment that you're making, which blog it associates with, and then you have a quick title, and then the content, and then you have the same as before. We have all of these other values where it could be the active and published. Maybe you don't want to publish it because you want to review it to make sure it is appropriate, and then set it active for other people to be able to read it at some later point. Then we have this thing called parent ID, and this is basically a self-reference join to the comment ID, which is over here. And why would you have this? Well, if someone is posting and commenting to your blog, you would want to reply to them, or other people would want to reply. And what you want to do is make it organized so that you can display that correctly to the site. And that's basically how and why we have this comment self-reference this way. And then we also have this thing called tags. Now, tags are very similar to categories. But I decided to create it as a separate table. You could, however, have this tags to be part of the category, and basically you would just make this like content type or something, the table associated here, and then have it referenced, and then that way you can say this is a category or this is a tag or something else, and then you would need to have these two tables here, so you could actually post it. And of course you would want to rename these tables to be appropriate to the structure that you wanted to create. So basically that's how you could do that. Something else that you could do is, now we are seeing the diagram and column mode. So if you go to view, this is what we have set up. You notice it has this little square around this, so that's how you know that it is a column name. But if you go to standard, it gives you a little bit more, and that's basically showing the column name, data type, and if it's allows null or not, allows nulls or not. And then as you're selecting the different columns, the properties are displayed here for you. You could actually then only show the primary keys, or you could go and to show names only, where it just shows the very top. and then you can go custom and you can decide what you want to see in here. So we're gonna just keep this as standard. Oh, excuse me, we're gonna keep this as column names, so make it a little bit easier to see what is being displayed to us. Let's go ahead and bring this down. Now, every time you make a change, the diagram will have this little star, meaning it requires a change. And the reason for this is that when you're saving, of course, we're going back and saving that data to this system table, is that as you move these around, it remembers the position so that when you open it again, it'll show it in the exact same position. That's why that's there. So let's go ahead and go over the tables. So now if you notice, we have these EF migration history table and blog item. This is from our previous post. We're going to delete these because we don't need them. We're only going to worry about the tables that we just created, which is these tables over here. We're not going to create any views or store procedures. And the reason for that is that because I chose SQL Server, you may not want to. And because we're using Entity Framework, what we want to do is make it so that backend could be anything. Maybe tomorrow or someone that is following along might want to use SQLite instead of SQL Server, or maybe MySQL or some other data store. And so the Entity Framework, we're going to write all our queries using the Entity Framework, and that will help us generate the T-SQL for the data store that we are connecting. So that's why we're not going to create any of those and rely solely for the Entity Framework to do that for us. So that's pretty much how the database is set up. Now what we need to do is actually figure out how to work this into our process of development, what that process looks like. So just because we created these tables doesn't mean that it's going to be just this and we're not going to modify it. And if you were to go over here, notice that we have this user. Not only that, we have this sign up. Maybe at some point you would want the comments, people commenting on your site to be associated with your site by being signed in and having to then be able to post. And so then how would you just modify this? And we're going to go through that process and how to, when you're adding additional tables here, what the process of development look like as you're publishing this to your production, and as you make changes, how those changes get applied to your production site. So in the next section, let's go over how to script these guys out and put it into a structure to will be part of a source control. So here I have my source control using GitHub. And what you can do is actually, if you go into your repository, you can then create new and then give the repository a name. For example, I use the blog database, and then you can give it a quick description. I made mine public. You can keep yours private if you don't want anyone to see it. And then I added a README so I can describe what the repo is all about, maybe how to build a database and so forth. And you can also, if you want to, you can add a gitignore template in here, and then have any licensing that you might have. We're not going to do anything with building, testing, and deploying, so we're just going to keep that unchecked and click create repo. Once you do that, you'll get something like this that I have. It's basically blank, there's nothing there. Now, how do you get this into your Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or some other place? So by clicking the code, you can actually copy the HTTPS URL and use your own source control UI to get that. Or you can use SSH, or you can use Git using command line. You can do that as well. Or you can open it with GitHub or Visual Studio. So let's click on the Open with Visual Studio, which you see the dialog now. You can click Open. This will open Visual Studio in folder mode. So now it's going to ask us to clone a repository, and where it's going to dump it. Here, our sources in the repo section is fine. So we're just going to hit clone. And then it goes in the background, and it'll create the folder for us. And this is the folder. So if we open this folder, now you can see that I have my README in here. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and create a new folder. And this is going to be my base script. And then I'm going to have a new folder. I'm going to call this scripts. Now, why do I have a base script and then I'll have this other folder called scripts? What I'm going to do is go to my database, and you can do a couple of things because we already have the table, so we don't need to write the SQL for it. I'm going to have SQL help me out and generate those for me. So there's a couple of ways you could do this. You can actually right click and script the database, and you can say create this to new query window for now because I'm not going to reuse this. So this is basically our database script that is created, and you can actually use this to generate the database for you. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to basically have the users create the database by putting it in the README, and that's just to show you why you would have a README and why you would use that. So let's go ahead and close this. Now, how do you get all the tables? So if you right click and then go to tasks, and then from here you can say generate scripts. We are presented by a dialog that's going to help us as like a wizard. Now we're not going to do entire database. We're going to do very specific database objects because we only did tables. That is why you see just the tables. Now I'm not going to use the migration history or blog item. I'm going to go to my category, my post category, post tag, post comment, and tag, and choose next. Now you can save this as a notebook or a script file to clipboard or new query window. So let's just do new query window for right now. Click next. Now it's going to give you a summary of everything that is going to do, and then choose next. It's going to go through all of those tasks, and now it's completed it. Click finish, and now we have our database tables created for us. But notice that we have these squiggly lines in here. That's because it knows that the tables already exist in this database, because you also have the use to go to the blog database. So it is complaining that there's already something in the database for this. Just to test this out, you can use this little icon here to parse. It's going to basically go through, make sure there's no errors. And as you can see, there are no errors, so parsing was good. Let's go ahead and create a new database to actually verify that this script actually works. So we'll call this blogs2. Click OK. So now it created the database. So what we're going to do is change this to blogs2, and now you can see those squiggly lines went away because it knows that there's no databases exist in there. So now if we execute this, you'll see the tables have already been created here for us. So we can verify that this script was successful in the initial creation of our database. So let's go ahead and remove this back to as blog. And let's actually copy this and go to our file. And now this is going to be our base script. So we're going to say new file, and we're going to say, so this is going to be our SQL script base objects, and the file extension will be SQL. And go ahead and paste this. And now we're going to save this. So every time you want to create the structure of your blog engine, you would basically copy this and then execute it on your database. Now, if you come back later on, you make any kind of a alter to the SQL. So let's go ahead and close this. And we can close this as well. So let's say you come back and you're making any kind of modification to this, and you want to add maybe a new column or something. So then you would create a script here, and it'll be like an alter to that database table or the structure of it, or maybe add a new table, and you would add that in here. So the first thing you would do is you would run this to create your database, but you don't have to do this all the time. If you already have a structure, what you can do is you can come back and only run the alter statements in there for your database. So that's pretty much all we have now for this. One thing I do want to mention, so if we look at this, this shows your branches, and right now we've checked out the main branch. What we can do is create a new branch, and we're going to say, for example, we'll call this Max's copy, create a new branch, and we're going to make this based off main and click create, and we're going to check out the branch. So now we are in my branch that we have this file created. And in the README, what we're going to do is put, I guess I have to copy the name of this and paste it here. There we go. So now we have that as well. And the next thing we can do is go ahead and actually check this stuff in. So we can go to our Git, you can do commit. So now if we open this up, you'll notice that we have quite a few changes that it's asking us to commit. We have this file indexer, we have some stuff for for Visual Studio, we have a project setting. This is some kind of SQLite database that Visual Studio uses. And what we want to do is this .vs extension file we don't want. And what we can do is we can say ignore these. So now when you click ignore, it no longer appears. So this too has our changes. You can always right click and you can see compare with unmodified. You can see what was changed. This being a new file, it's already there, right? So the next thing is you want to stage these and put your README in there as well. But notice also we have this git ignore file. So if you look at this, notice that when we went over here and created a new repo, it asked us if you wanted to create a, click here. So notice here it's asking us if you wanted a template, right? And then there's a bunch of different templates here that you could use. If you had selected one of those templates, it would have created a file called .gitignore and it would have in here. So right now, anything that's in here will be ignored. So what we want to ignore is the folder .vs and the path for it, which is in the root. And that's why the Git will always look at this file and ignore anything that's in here so that it doesn't appear in your stage information. So now that I have this, I'm going to commit my stage, and then you can say commit and push. So what's the difference between committing? When you commit, it will actually commit that locally, but if you say commit and push, then what will happen is that it will commit it and then push it to the server as well. So now I'm going to put a comment. And I'm going to say commit. So now that we check that stuff in, let's actually see what the experience would look like using the tool that comes with the GitHub desktop. So you can actually download this from GitHub. So what we can do is go to our current repository, use the add. We're going to add an existing repository, and we're going to go ahead and choose the path. Here, this is going to be in my SQL database. Select the folder, add repository, and now my repo, the current repository is over here. And as you can see, publish this branch. So this branch will be published to GitHub. So if we click this, now it's going to push it to the server. So now if we come to our blog database, we have two branches. And if we go over here, this is the Max's copy, and then this is the default branch over here. So you can also look at changes. So if you make any changes over here, for example, and if you come over here, you can now see those changes. You can decide what you want to do. We're going to go ahead and discard this because it was just an example to show you how you can work with that. So let's go ahead and discard that. And what it's going to do is basically undo the changes and put the SQL file or the README into the state that it was previously. So here now we've created our database structure into a SQL file that we can use later on and basically be able to recreate it at any point of time. So now that we put our database into source control, let's go ahead and work with our Visual Studio and sync those database tables that we created within the block context that we have over here, so that we're going to of course delete all of these so that the structure of what we have where we created these models, they all will be set correctly and having the right tables associated to the objects within our ASP.NET application. Okay, so here we are actually with our web application where we have our block context and the migration and all the pages. So what we want to do is remove everything and only have our category post, post category, post tag tables for our blog engine. To do that, we're going to go ahead and start deleting stuff. So one of the other thing is that when we actually created the CRUD operations, one of the first thing that we did was it actually overwrote the index file, so this will have to get replaced. So what we need to do is grab that default that we have. So I've saved this. Let's go ahead and copy that and bring it over here and put that on the default for this. So now that we have this, let's go back to make sure that the context stuff that we have in here is set correctly by deleting everything that we have here. And we can keep this context, which is fine. Actually, we don't. So this really should be Git. So it shouldn't be async. And this can be void because it's not an async operation, but we don't really have a get operation for it, so we could just delete that as well. Then the next thing is this context. We could leave it there for future reference if you wanted to use it, but to be honest, we're not going to be using it at least for this one just yet, so we're going to go ahead and delete it as well. So keep everything blank. Yeah, so that's pretty much for the index page. The next thing we need to do is delete all of the examples and stuff that we created, the details, delete in the CRUD. So let's go ahead and delete these guys. And then we also had this test. So let's go ahead and delete that as well. Okay. And then the app.json, we had our password here for the blog context. We can keep that there, it's not a problem. Then for the data, we had these test item and the blog. Let's go ahead and delete these two. And so for migrations, we can delete these guys as well. We don't really care about those. Actually, you can remove the whole folder. And then for the blog context, we don't really have a blog items anymore, so let's go ahead and delete that as well. There's no models here. Let's delete that as well. There we go. Okay, so now in the using statements, this should be fine. Let's go to our programs. And in here we have our blog context, which is fine. And we're getting the connection string. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that we have in here. So that should be fine. Let's go ahead and actually delete this, and maybe what we can do is keep everything inside of over here. Okay, so the next thing we have to do is go to our NuGet package manager. We'll go to the package manager console. So this is the console where you can run some operations. Basically, this is like a PowerShell to use for adding packages and stuff. So pretty much everything you can do through the package manager UI. The console is basically there's the command line of it using PowerShell. So that's what we got in here. Now, one of the things you can do here is to try to get some help. And to do that, we're just going to say get help. And then we're going to say about entity framework core. And this is going to give us some commands that we can use. So this is the EF, and there's some description. These are some commandlets that you have actually seen us use before. And then there's also some of these other additional commands over here. And so what we need to do is basically, let's go back to our table. Let's go ahead and delete these two tables. We don't need them. So go ahead and delete that. And then we don't need the blog item either. So let's go ahead and delete that. All right, so now what we need to do is grab all of this information and have it brought over here as models that we can use. So one of the things that you want to do here is use this command called the Scaffold Db Context. And what this will do is basically go to the database and generate models based on the tables that you have. In order to use this, we need to have a connection string. So we're going to go ahead and get our connection string from over here. Let's copy that. Okay. And then the second thing we want to do here is to provide the provider name. So that's going to be the Microsoft.entity framework core.SQL Server. And then we want to have a output directory. And this output directory basically is going to be where all of the models will go. And let's just create one called models and have it in there. So let's go ahead and select this and enter. Now it failed because the first thing it's going to do is try to build your project so that way it can use the assemblies inside of it. So, but it looks like our build failed. So we must have missed something here. And the way to figure that out is let's go ahead and create build and see what kind of errors we generate. And so we have some errors in here. Okay, so we forgot a namespace. Let's go ahead and delete that. Actually, we can delete pretty much everything here because this is not needed. Okay, let's try it again. Let's do a build. And okay, the build succeeded. So now if we go back to our package manager console and try the same thing. So here I could go and debug to see why this failed, but there is another option that I can use, and that is to pass the block context connection string so that it can go ahead and work. So let's try that. So this is with a password, but what we want to do is use a connection string. So we're going to pass the name to be the block context, and then the SQL Server and output directory of models. So let's go ahead and execute this line by hitting enter. And it went ahead and created the models folder, but inside of this it also created the block context for us. The thing is in here that this block context is actually, it's doing blogs context, so we'll just rename that and then fix this so that becomes the block context. And what we want to do is basically let's go ahead and delete this and then move our block context over here and then move the whole folders model into the data section. There we go. Let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit. and inspect this. So here we have this on configure, but we already have this set up over here for adding a DB context. So we can actually we can keep it. It's not going to hurt it. And if you look, this is the on model creating, where it's mapping the columns and tables into our properties and classes over here. So we'll just keep these guys. Let's make sure that the namespaces are set correctly. There we go. Let's make sure that this is also set correctly, and it is. Okay. And we have all our categories, posts, information there. Yeah, so that's it. Okay, let's close all of these. Let's go ahead and run our project. There we go. So everything is working and building just fine. So the next thing we need to do is put our application in source control, similar to what we did with our SQL scripts, and that'll be next. So before we integrate this to source control, I wanted to kind of rename the solution as well as the web application. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click on it once, and you'll get the renaming by having the web application solution selected like you see up here. So I'm going to call this super duper blog. Next, what I want to do is I rename the web application to blog website. Okay. Now there's one thing. If we actually open this in File Explorer, you'll see that the name has changed. But if we open this with, let's say, choose an app, and let's open this with Visual Code, you'll notice that the application, the proj file, is still named web application. So to fix this, what we can do is go ahead and close this. We'll save everything. Let's go to where we are, and now we've named this into the blog website, right? So let's rename this guy blog website. And in the solution, we're going to go ahead and call this blog website as well. So now if we open the solution, it should open up our project, and it should find our project and it should open the blog website. There we go. And the reason I did this because later on what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take this blog context and model out and put it into a web API. And this is why this is the website. We'll have an API, web API that's going to do that. But for now, this is good enough. And let's go ahead and add this into source control. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to create a Git repository. So it's going to go to this web application folder, and the reason for that is because when we created a solution, it was also called the web application. Let's go fix that as well. To do that, we'll go ahead and close this. Let's go back to this solution, and we call this super duper blog. There we go. So now if you open it, it should have the correct name when we're trying to create repo. Let's go ahead and right click on this, create repository, and now it's going to have the correct name, or selecting the correct folder. And we do want this into GitHub. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in to GitHub. So we've successfully signed in, and repo is going to be super duper blog, and we're going to create and push, and we're going to actually not make this private, we'll make this public, and this is where it's going to be, this is going to be the path for it. So we'll go ahead and create and push. So as you can see here now that it is going to create the repo on GitHub, and that's successful. And as you can now see, you have the little icons with the lock that it is in source control. So if we come up to our GitHub desktop, and if we click add existing repo, and then choose the path. So this was the blog database, and if we select this, you can see that now we do have that. So if we make any changes, you can see all of the history and everything else. So that's pretty much all we need to do for this one. So in this video tutorial, we went over the database that we're going to be using for our blog engine. And in the next one, we'll go ahead and work with the blog API, which is going to be a web API, and it's going to have all our CRUD operation for the blog, as well as to have search and read operations to be able to display the web page. So that'll be next. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next one.